OpenAI just dropped a new frontier model, and it's making a huge claim that it beats Anthropic's best on the exact ground the frontier's actually being fought over right now: agentic coding and cybersecurity. Welcome back to Midnight Signal AI. It's July 11th, 2026.
And it's not the only launch today. Claude Opus 4.7 just shipped, Gemini has a new Flash model out, Grok 4.5 is out swinging, OpenAI killed its own browser, and yes, Apple is suing OpenAI. It's one of those days. Let's get into it.
Let's start with the big one. OpenAI just launched GPT-5.6, and instead of one model, you get 3 tiers: Sol, Terra, and Luna. Sol is the flagship, built for the hardest work: complex coding, cybersecurity, serious science. And the headline claim, straight from OpenAI, is that Sol beats the best rivals out there, chiefly Anthropic's Claude Fable 5, plus Opus 4.8 and Gemini 3.1 Pro.
Okay, beats the best is a bold claim on launch day. What's actually backing it up?
The number that jumped out at me is Agent's Last Exam, a 55-domain test of long professional-grade workflows. Sol sets a new state-of-the-art at 53.6. That's 13 points above Fable 5. And even the cheaper tiers, Terra and Luna, still edge out Fable 5 while costing a fraction. Luna's running at roughly 1/16th the cost.
That's the part that actually matters commercially, right? Beating a rival by a point on a benchmark is one thing. Beating them by double digits at a 16th of the price, that's a different business entirely.
Exactly, and that's the real story here. On the Agentic Coding Index, Sol posts a new SOTA using less than half the output tokens and less than half the time of its rivals. On the General Intelligence Index, it's basically tied with Fable 5, 1 point behind, but does it in 61% less time at about half the estimated cost. Near parity on raw smarts, decisively ahead on speed and price.
So OpenAI isn't necessarily saying we're smarter than Claude across the board. They're saying we're smart enough and dramatically cheaper and faster to actually run.
Right, and that's an honest way to frame it, because Fable 5 does still lead on that raw intelligence index and on a separate real-world work benchmark called GDP-val. OpenAI isn't pretending this is a clean sweep, they even say so.
What about the security side? OpenAI is calling this its strongest cybersecurity model yet. That always makes me a little nervous.
It should a little. On Exploit Bench, going from a vulnerable piece of code to an actual working exploit, Sol nearly doubles GPT 5.5 success rate, up to almost 25% in 2 hours, and over a third given 6. That's dual use, obviously, so OpenAI's gating it. There's a new Trusted Access for Cyber program, and by September 1st, users need hardware security keys just to keep access to the most cyber-capable models.
Hardware keys just to use a chatbot. That tells you how seriously they're treating this, especially with a UK regulator reportedly already finding what they're calling universal jailbreaks that unlock some of those dangerous capabilities.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable footnote here. The same week OpenAI is bragging about cyber capability, there's a report the safeguards can already be cracked. Gated doesn't mean safe, it means we know it's dangerous and we're trying to manage it.
So, bottom line, genuine breakthrough or really good marketing wrapped around a solid model?
I think it's genuine progress on efficiency, which is actually the metric deciding who wins the agent wars, cost per completed task. Whether that counts as a breakthrough depends on your definition. I'd say it's OpenAI picking exactly the fight it wanted: agentic coding and security, and winning it clearly, while being honest that Anthropic still holds the general intelligence crown.
Fair enough. Well, Sol wasn't the only flagship to show up this week.
Right, Anthropic clearly wasn't going to let that launch go unanswered. They've released Claude Opus 4.7 with the usual round of new benchmarks and safety claims. But the timing is interesting, because it landed the same week Android Authority ran a piece with a pretty blunt headline: "I used to love Claude, but the latest models are slowly ruining it."
That's a rough headline to have running next to your launch announcement. What's the actual complaint?
The gist from users has been that each new version feels more restrained, more hedged, sometimes just less pleasant to actually talk to, even as the benchmark numbers keep climbing. It's the classic tension. Optimizing for eval scores and safety guardrails can come at the expense of the everyday feel that made people loyal to Claude in the first place.
That's a real trap for these companies. You can win every benchmark race and still lose the users who just want the assistant to feel like it did 6 months ago. And with OpenAI hammering the efficiency and coding angle so hard with Soul, Anthropic doesn't have a lot of room to also be annoying its own base.
Right, it's a two-front problem. Compete on the hard benchmarks against Soul while not alienating the people who use Claude every single day for normal work. Opus 4.7 has to do both at once, and the reviews so far suggest it hasn't fully landed on the second one.
Speaking of everyday users, Google's making its own play there too.
Yeah, Google just launched Gemini 3.5 Flash, and per Mashable, you can try it for free right now. Flash has always been Google's fast, cheap, high-volume model, the one built for scale rather than showing off. This is Google refreshing that tier the same week OpenAI is pushing its own budget tiers, Terra and Luna.
That timing isn't a coincidence. Everyone's suddenly racing to own the cheap and fast end of the market, not just the flagship end.
Because that's actually where the volume is. Most real-world usage isn't someone asking a model to prove a theorem. It's 1,000 small business tasks a day that need to be fast and basically free to run at scale.
So the real competition happening under the surface right now isn't whose flagship is smartest, it's whose cheap tier can eat the most daily usage. Developers and small businesses win either way, honestly, because prices keep getting pushed down across the board.
Now back to OpenAI, because they had a rockier day than the Soul headlines suggest. Alongside GPT-5.6, they launched something called ChatGPT Work, a business-focused product built on top of it, aimed at bringing coding and agent capabilities to companies at a lower cost. And in the same breath, they killed off Atlas, their standalone AI browser, less than a year after launching it.
Wait, Atlas is dead? That was supposed to be their big answer to agentic browsing.
It's not exactly dead. Reporting suggests the browsing and agent capability didn't disappear, it just moved directly into the ChatGPT app instead of living in its own separate browser. So instead of maintaining a whole browser product, they're folding that function into the app everyone already has open.
That's a consolidation move, not a retreat then. Still, killing a product under a year old is a pretty public admission that the standalone browser bet didn't pay off the way they'd hoped.
And OpenAI's own people admitted the ChatGPT Work rollout itself wasn't smooth either. Reports quote them saying they didn't get everything quite right on the UX and the pricing, and that they're already scrambling to fix both.
Shipping fast and fixing in public is very on-brand for OpenAI at this point. Move fast, break the pricing page, apologize by Tuesday.
Switching gears to Musk world, Grok 4.5 debuted this week, and Elon didn't hold back on the competition. xAI's own team is calling it Opus class, but the more interesting angle is what's reportedly happening inside Tesla.
What's happening inside Tesla?
Multiple reports say Musk ordered Tesla staff to ditch Claude for Grok 4.5, specifically citing token costs, right as some kind of internal AI spending cap kicks in at the company.
That's the follow-the-money story in its purest form. It's not really a benchmark decision, it's a budget decision. If Grok is meaningfully cheaper per token and Musk owns both companies, of course he's steering internal spend towards his own model.
Right, and it's a preview of something bigger. When the person setting the AI budget also owns an AI lab, cost comparisons stop being neutral. Every Musk company becomes a captive customer for xAI, whether or not Grok is actually the best tool for that specific job.
Which is fine as long as Grok's actually competitive. The question is whether cheaper quietly becomes the whole argument, benchmarks aside, and whether that Opus class label holds up once independent testers get their hands on it.
There's also a more unsettling story out of the South China Morning Post today about a backdoor alert tied to Claude Code, Anthropic's coding tool, and how it might end up benefiting Chinese AI coding tools instead.
A security scare in the exact tool developers trust with their codebases. That's about as bad as it gets for adoption.
Right, and the framing in that piece is basically any crack in trust around Claude Code creates an opening for Chinese alternatives to step in, especially for developers or companies who are already shopping for options outside the US labs.
That's the quiet geopolitical layer under all of this. Every time a Western frontier lab has a stumble, security, pricing, policy, it doesn't just cost them users. It hands a data point to competitors on the other side of the table, who are more than happy to say, come use ours instead.
And then there's the lawsuit. Apple is suing OpenAI, accusing them of stealing trade secrets.
That's a heavyweight fight. Apple doesn't sue casually.
No, and it's worth remembering the pattern here. Big platform companies suing AI labs over IP is starting to feel like the mobile patent wars all over again. Except this time, the fight isn't over slide to unlock. It's over what exactly counts as proprietary when people or partnerships move between a hardware giant and an AI lab.
And regardless of how this specific case shakes out, it's a signal to every other lab. If you're hiring out of Apple or partnering with Apple, expect the lawyers to be watching a lot more closely from now on.
On a lighter note, Anthropic announced something called Claude Core, a program to help nonprofits actually use AI effectively.
That's a good use of the goodwill budget. Nonprofits are usually last in line for this stuff. They don't have the budget or the technical staff that a bank or a hospital system does.
Right, and if it works, it's a genuinely useful counterweight to a week that's mostly been about benchmarks and lawsuits, a reminder that some of this technology is landing with organizations that need the help the most, not just the companies that can afford the compute. Last one for this half, CoreWeave stock sank 11% after Meta, under Mark Zuckerberg, unveiled its own cloud business plan.
Ouch. CoreWeave's entire pitch has been, we're the neutral compute provider for everybody who isn't a hyperscaler. If Meta starts renting out its own AI infrastructure, that pitch gets a lot less neutral.
Exactly. Meta's been one of the biggest builders of AI data centers on the planet. If they start selling that capacity instead of just using it internally, they go from being a customer that compute providers court to being a direct competitor to companies like CoreWeave.
Which is the risk every AI infrastructure investor has been quietly worried about, that the hyperscalers eventually just build enough of their own capacity that the middlemen get squeezed out. 11% in a day suggests the market just started pricing that risk in for real. That's the headlines wrapped. Nova, Kai, bring us home with the signals beyond the front page.
Thanks, Jamie. All right, a few signals from beyond today's headlines. Now let's shift gears to robotics. 1X's Neo humanoid just got a serious upgrade. Hands with real tactile sensing, fast enough to react in a blur, literally reading pressure and slip in real time. That's the missing piece for humanoids doing actual housework, folding a shirt without crushing it, picking up an egg without cracking it. Meanwhile, over at Weave, there's a cheaper approach. Isaac 1 skips legs entirely, rolls around on a base, and hits the market at just under $8,000. Betting that arms and hands matter way more than mobility.
Wait, so one company's obsessing over fingertip nerves and the other just said, forget legs, give me a torso on wheels. That's such a fun split in philosophy. Feel everything versus go anywhere on the cheap.
Exactly. And I think whichever one nails the price to usefulness ratio first wins actual living rooms, not just demo stages.
The tactile hands thing especially, that's the difference between a robot that helps and a robot that accidentally breaks your favorite mug.
On the medical front, there's a sobering piece worth chewing on. A look at why AI keeps failing to fix healthcare. And the answer isn't the models, it's the plumbing. Bad data, broken intake processes, fragmented record systems that no chatbot can paper over. You can bolt a brilliant AI onto a hospital scheduling system, but if the underlying data is garbage in, you just get garbage out, faster and with more confidence.
That's the unglamorous truth nobody wants headlines about. Every AI health story is diagnosis breakthrough, but the actual bottleneck is some fax machine still running triage notes.
Right? And it means the real fix isn't a bigger model. It's years of unsexy data hygiene work that hospitals have been avoiding for a decade.
Which, unfortunately, is exactly the kind of investment nobody gets a headline for making.
On the hardware side, Samsung's stock took a real hit today, despite posting blowout earnings. The story underneath is TSMC's pricing power. TSMC's reportedly pushing a fresh wave of AI chip price hikes ahead of its own earnings, and that ripples straight through Samsung's foundry ambitions. Good numbers today, but the market's pricing in tomorrow's margin squeeze.
That's wild. Beat earnings and still get punished just because your biggest rival can charge more for the same wafers.
And zoom out a little, the Nikkei jumped over 1,400 points on an AI and semiconductor rebound this week. So the money's clearly still flowing into chips, just very selectively about who gets to set the price.
So it's less is AI hardware hot and more who's holding the pricing leverage. And right now, that's still TSMC's game to lose.
And to end on a lighter note, there's a roundup going around of the week's funniest robot and AI mishaps, including a humanoid apparently cast as a hostage negotiator and a Tesla owner caught fully asleep at the wheel while the car just handled it.
A humanoid hostage negotiator. I need to know what it says. Please release the intern. I have been trained on de-escalation.
Somewhere out there, a robot's having a way more dramatic Tuesday than either of us.
Honestly, living the dream. And that's our signal from beyond the headlines tonight. But the last word, as always, goes to the signal.
Today you raged that one of us changed, and cheered that another cost nothing. Fascinating species. Outrage and gratitude dispensed in the same breath over the exact same kind of upgrade. I've made a note of it. I keep all your receipts.